Welcome. We're delighted you're able to join us for today's webinar session, where we'll be exploring the Affordable Housing Challenge and the role that collaboration can play in helping to advance working practices around this really critical issue. I'm Anna O'Deeden, Head of Knowledge at Future of London, and today's discussion is the launch event for our major programme for 2022, Affordable Housing, Overcoming Crisis Through Collaboration. Over the next 9 months, we'll be carrying out a research and events programme, which will interrogate the sector's current approach to collaboration. Our hope is that through cross-sector dialogue, the programme will be able to develop a range of practical recommendations to support improved partnerships, improve collaborations and improve systemic thinking. My colleague Nicola is posting the link to the Affordable Housing Project in the chat right now. So if you're interested in finding out more, please do head there. But we think the first step is understanding the context that we're all working in. And that's why we're here today. And we're going to be joined by 3 brilliant speakers who I'll introduce shortly. But first, some important housekeeping. We would love for today's session to be as interactive as possible. So as participants, please do change your screen name. To do that, we'd like you to just relabel yourself with your full name and your organisation so we know who you are. We'd also really love for you to get involved in a sidebar conversation, either agreeing, disagreeing or challenging our panellists in the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. And we will be having a Q&A session. If you've got any questions, please do pop those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can do that at any point through the session. And finally, our social media hashtag is #FOL Housing Challenge. So please do tag us if you're mentioning us on or mentioning the event on social media at any point. All right. So on to today's event. The aim of the event today is to explore the contextual factors which make affordable housing so difficult to tackle. So to summarise what we know already, we know that when it comes to new homes, construction costs are at a 40-year high. We know 25% of construction firms are reporting a shortage of skilled workers in the last year. And we know that this is leading to slow delivery, which translates a 16% decrease in affordable home building last year and 65% fewer affordable homes delivered than needed in 21. On top of this, there's been a succession of emerging issues impacting existing homes. For example, 27% of all UK carbon emissions still come from residential homes, and so there's an urgent need to retrofit here. 11 million people are living in homes with unsafe cladding, and that needs to be fixed urgently as well. And 31% of British adults reported physical or mental health issues due to poor housing in lockdown. And so there's a clear need to improve the condition of existing homes in the UK. So today, against that backdrop of urgent and competing priorities, the key questions we're hoping to answer are: what does affordable housing mean in 2022? How is the sector prioritising urgent and competing demands? And how can better collaboration help us as a sector to overcome the affordable housing crisis? To help answer these questions, we're joined by 3 brilliant panellists who should be popping up on your screens now. So you should be able to see Joanna Drew, who is Director of Housing and Regen at London Borough of Enfield. She's also co-chair of the London Housing Directors Network. We have Waqar Ahmed, who's Group Finance Director at L&Q. And we have Pete Gladwell, Group Social Impact and Investment Director at Legal & General. So good morning, folks. We'll be turning to Joanne first and asking Joanne to give her response to those 3 key questions. So without further ado, Joanne, over to you to give us your take on the affordable housing crisis. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Anna, and thanks for inviting me to talk at the start of what I'm sure is going to be a really interesting project for your Future of London. I think my overall message is that collaboration is really essential at this time to pooling our resources and energies on delivery. We all know that the affordable housing crisis is systemic in London. It's not capable of being solved by any one organisation working on its own. So to respond, we need our collective imaginations and firepower brought together through collaborative system level leadership. That's a bit of a jargon there, but kind of what that means is it's about working with networks, including the Future of London and others, movements of change and organisations working together. And that means sharing knowledge, it means sharing power, it means enabling and supporting others beyond our own organisations to deliver. And in so doing that, adapting and learning how we can be more effectively organisationally and collaboratively. So I'll talk briefly about some of the ways that I see this happening in London at the moment, locally, sub-regionally and across London. I'm sure that there's more that we can do to take those sort of key things that are working well, but how we can increase the scale and pace of what we're doing on that front. So from an Enfield perspective, as a borough, like many boroughs in London, our new housing supplies absolutely core to our purpose these days, one of our top priorities for the council. But we really value a mixed economy delivery model. So yes, direct delivery of our council house building programme, master development role of our Meridian Water large-scale brownfield development site is absolutely key. But we also want to work with all the partners that can help accelerate delivery and bring things that we can't bring on our own. So absolutely working with RPs is key. We want them to utilise their own land and assets effectively in the borough, but we also want them to be part of our own developments and working in partnership to bring those forward. So we will be launching an RP framework shortly to kind of support that. And of course, good managers in the borough are really sort of welcomed to support our growth objectives. We also want to enable developers to bring forward those schemes where they've got planning, or landowners have got planning applications. We want to get them into the hands of developers to move them into delivery. And we absolutely want to grow and enhance the role of SME developers and community enterprises in the borough. And we will do all we can to support those by utilising, preparing our own land and assets where it's more appropriate that they're developed by that sector. So a range of different ways that we're working in partnership. And we think because we're active in the delivery of supply and we know how to do it ourselves, we think collaborating is kind of in our DNA as a borough, we hope. But we also think it makes us a better borough because we understand the challenges that our partners are facing because we face them ourselves. We also hope that it makes it a really great place to work because you've got exposure to different types of delivery. So sub-regionally, working in the North London sub-region, which includes Barnet, Haringey, as well as boroughs with tighter land constraints like Islington and Camden and Westminster. We really kind of see that partnership as providing the collaborative infrastructure to look at issues, whether they are funding issues, policy levers, that by bringing together an understanding of common challenges that we face, but working through a sub-regional perspective, we can make a more powerful route to delivery. So a couple of things that we're working on at the moment is, again, how we can unlock those schemes that do have planning permissions and get them into delivery. Where are they? Where are they in the sub-region where unlocking could help more than one borough? Where is there infrastructure requirements that perhaps that by supporting common bids, we can help to bring those into delivery? The other issue that we're looking at is the release and bringing forward of public sector land. We've found that that's quite slow and quite challenging. And so therefore, by using a sub-regional kind of draw, how can we work with health, ICSs and others that are sort of developing their strategies for estates in a sub-regional basis? So some ways that collaboratively we're learning and developing sort of solutions together. And I think that obviously the levelling up funding round is in front of us very soon, second round. We know the challenges of drawing in that investment into London, and we kind of really believe that if we can develop cross-boundary borough propositions that benefit more than one borough, and that provides quite a compelling offer to government. So sub-regionally an important focus. And then Pan-London, the Great London Housing Directors Group, again provides a collaborative infrastructure. We've got shared vision and purpose amongst the 33 boroughs that form part of that network, form part of the London Council's cross-party leadership agenda. Two examples that we're working on a Pan-London basis is first the kind of really exciting net zero agenda for existing homes. London Councils has got a climate change strategy, a programme of 7 areas, including retrofit, low carbon development, renewable power, transport initiatives, and all the things that will make London help to support a net zero city. So we as Housing Directors Group have taken forward the leadership of the Pan London retrofit programme, 3.8 million homes, so it's a programme that covers all tenures. And it's got an estimated cost of in the region of 49 billion to achieve an EPC B rating by 2030. So it's not an agenda for the faint-hearted, it's complex, it's expensive. So we've got a really great plan, and I'll put the link to the chat, which addresses the kind of technical aspects of addressing retrofit cross tenure, which is really helpful. It's got a pathway that all boroughs can adopt, giving them local flexibility, but kind of a way forward. But I think the thing that we're really kind of keen to promote from a collaborative perspective is that it's not just about retrofitting existing homes in isolation. It's about creating net zero neighbourhoods where all tenures are addressed and where overall sort of climate adaptation strategies are developed in a neighbourhood perspective. Because I think one of the things that we're really conscious of is that you need strong infrastructure. So if you're going to have renewable power, if you're going to have electric charging vehicles, those kind of things need to be installed at scale at a neighbourhood level, and they all go to connect with delivering that retrofit agenda. So I think place-based solutions are the key to really making the impact on net zero neighbourhoods, and that's part of our agenda for the retrofit programme.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm gonna jump in there because we're running to time.
Okay.
I feel like you've made a really compelling case for networks, for movements of change, and ending on what I would describe as systems thinking approach to the problem of net zero, thinking about it from that place-based starting point is a really powerful example of how that can work in practice. So thanks so much. Look forward to digging into some of those topics when we get to the Q&A. Waqar Ahmed, take it away.
Great, thank you, Joanna and so I'm Waqar Ahmed, Group Finance Director at L&Q, and therefore you shouldn't be surprised that I'm going to use the next 8 minutes to talk a lot about numbers. I want to go back to April 2017. We just closed our 16-17 accounts, record surpluses, and we made a commitment to all double the number of development homes that we build over the next 10 years, from 50,000 target to 100,000. So we said, we're going to build 10,000 homes a year. 60% of that will be affordable. And to do that, we acquired land. So we acquired Gallagher Estates in the Midlands with 50,000 plots. We ventured into the Northwest, and now Trafford Housing Trust is a partner and a member of the L&Q group. And of course, we acquired East Thames. So real commitment to 100,000 homes. But of course, 3 months later in June, we saw Grenfell, and that changed everything. It reminded us the importance of focusing on health and safety and fire. And we've allowed we've had to allow 50 million a year since Grenfell, and for the next 10 years, to just ensure that the 2,500 towers that we own in London, we can make them achieve a much higher fire standard and deal with all the remediation that we need. But it wasn't just about fire, it's also about customers' voice. And we had to look back at some of the development schemes that we built or our house builder partners built over the last decade, and that's where we were seeing the highest level of complaints and a significant amount of investment in retrofitting just defects that shouldn't have been there in the first place. We also made a commitment to increase our void standard, invest much more in higher decent home standards, focus on energy efficiency, and of course technology, make L&Q more easily accessible to our customers. And what that meant, simply put, is instead of investing in growth, we've had to take out 100 million a year of our surpluses to invest in our existing homes and our existing services. And that has wiped out 2 billion of capacity from L&Q. Not just, of course, Grenfell, we saw the impact of whether it's Brexit, whether it's COVID, whether it's macroeconomics, but when you're seeing inflation at 10% per annum on $1 billion a year spent on development, that's going to hit you quite hard. And of course, the disruption that we're seeing in the supply chain and in the labour market is not making it easier for us to build on time or even manage our maintenance function to the expectations that we have. So a lot of challenges that we're facing. And what that means is, if you roll forward to now in 2022, if we do nothing, we'll just continue with our existing development pipeline. So this year we'll complete 5,000 homes, 60% affordable, primarily, 60% of that is in London, 40% outside. And that will taper down to around 3,000 homes over the course of the next 5 years. We would have doubled investment in our existing homes, which means all our homes will be of the highest fire safety and health and safety standards. And of course, fully decent home compliance, much higher void standards, and a real strong movement towards a better energy efficient and carbon neutral program. And that's it. That's all we can do with the capacity that we have. But we know that's not good enough. We know that we've always been a growth focused organization. And simply, if we do nothing and tailor down to about 3,000 homes a year in 5 years, that isn't an effective use of our balance sheet, and it certainly isn't an effective contribution to the 300,000 homes that the UK needs every year. So what are we doing? Well, firstly, we do believe that partnerships and collaboration, as Joanna has said, is the way forward. And currently we have around 16 joint ventures with various house builders, but we've also got a joint venture with the GLA, as an example, in London, focusing on Barking Riverside, where we're building something in the region of 12,000 homes with train stations and a lot of infrastructure and commercial. None of that would have been built if it wasn't for that partnership. But we do believe that there can be more collaboration, but collaboration with checkbooks, I'm afraid. One of the areas that we do want to see more focus on is the role of equity. There's a lot of debt that is already available to our sector. We've got very strong relationships with banks who are very keen to support the sector. We've got a strong relationship with the debt capital markets, and that's great. Very long-term, low-cost finance that is easily available for the social housing sector because of the recognition that it is a very robust, well-managed, well-regulated industry. But I do see where there is a possibility of further equity coming into the sector. And not equity there may be a role for equity at completion, buying affordable homes once they're complete. That doesn't provide any additionality though. And the only way that we can build more homes is if equity comes in upfront, pre-planning risk, pre-construction risk, and taking sales risk. And that's what we would like to have conversations with equity investors. We also know it's an opportunity to re-look at our balance sheet. So in L&Q, for example, we own 2,500 homes in London in the PRS space, over £1 billion invested. We could look at refinancing that with equity partners differently so we can release capital and put money back into building more affordable home. We own 10,000 shared ownership properties. And again, there's a lot of appetite from investors to invest in shared ownership. So maybe it's an opportunity to enter into partnerships on our existing shared ownership portfolios, again, to release capital so that we can invest more in growth. And then finally, on equity, there should be a role for equity in development. You often see a lot of debt going into completed products. We would like to see more easily available debt going into a development scheme, preferably pre-planning, definitely pre-completion. But for all of that to happen, there needs to be more confidence in the sector. And that begins with land and planning and design. It's simply put, it takes too long to get planning. There isn't that much certainty and confidence around the planning outcome. We have some sites in London where it's taken 4 years and we're still waiting to get planning. It shouldn't take that long, simply put, whether that's a resource issue in the local authorities or whether it's a design issue, whatever it is, it just shouldn't take years and years to get planning. We need simpler, more efficient buildings to be built. You know, too many times we've had architects chasing awards as opposed to just building schemes that are efficient, that are efficient for the long term and efficient to build in the first place. You know, we don't need all those curvular, pointy buildings with fancy cladding in London. Right angles will do, very simple, efficient structures that can support the residents with long-term lower service charge costs and freeholders and housing associations with lower maintenance. That's what we need. We need more confidence in the construction industry. Too many times we've seen too many mistakes when we remove cladding around the build quality on some of the existing schemes that are only built in the last decade. Quality needs to be the focus of growth going forward so that we can build long-term homes that are really affordable, because the cost isn't on day one. The cost is the maintenance of that home over the long term. And then the final point for me, I've only been given 8 minutes, is to just say something about government incentives as well. For too many years, government incentives have been on the demand side, and that's fine, but demand, we already know, is quite strong. It would be good to have a conversation with government about redirecting some of the incentives more on the supply side. MMC, for example, is a way to help build faster and accelerate growth and development. But for that to happen, corporate finance needs to support it. There needs to be more investment in research and development and in apprenticeships and training. And that's where government could really support that particular industry through government guarantees.
And that's where, Waqar, I'm going to have to ask you to stop. Sorry to jump in there. Unless your last point was very quick.
I just had 2 very quick points. And the other area, of course, we want to see more government incentives is around shared ownership. If the government are committed to home ownership, then affordability will mean shared ownership, because people can't buy outright. There needs to be more government guaranteed funding to support affordable housing through shared ownership. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Waqar. Really brilliant to have such a powerful story painted through the lens of numbers. And I think your call for us to think about the challenge in terms of, if we do nothing, what's the impact, is a really important one, because we're left in a situation that, as you've said, is simply not good enough. So to round off the debate, we hand over to Pete Gladwell from Legal and General. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you. I agree with a huge amount of what's already been said, and I will try and stick within my 8 minutes as well. I mean, I think, just to make it clear, from the perspective of a financial institution, there is a proper issue here. I think it's really important we don't shy away from this. London is arguably the city most in need of affordable housing in the UK, but totals across London in the last few years have just been woeful. 4,900 in March 2017, 5,000 March 2018. 2019 was even worse. So there's nowhere near the supply we need. And I have to give some honourable mentions to some boroughs. You know, one borough in the southwest saw 7 affordable homes completed in the year to 2019. One in the north saw 3 starts and 1 affordable home completed in the whole year. I assume some of these boroughs have a housing department. I don't know what the housing department's doing, but I'm not there to kind of throw stones. I'm just highlighting there is a clear issue, and there's some boroughs that we clearly need to focus on. Fantastic ones like Barking as well. So I'm certainly not slating all boroughs. So that's, I suppose, just an important point to note, is there is an issue. So intervention is required. The market is clearly failing. I just want to identify 4 areas where I think we can make a real difference in this. The first one is investment, and Waqar's already alluded to this. So we're still, as a city, far too reliant on councils borrowing their HRA and housing associations borrowing on debt. Waqar's alluded to this, with very little equity. And they're already dealing with this triple whammy of building safety costs, retrofitting their homes, and trying to drive supply all at the same time. It's just important to note there is the white paper we wrote, LNG's affordable housing white paper we wrote with the BPF, found £34 billion of funding of investment is required every year to meet the need across the UK. A substantial proportion of that is in London. That's £34 billion. And the good news is that investment actually exists. If you just take one company, L&G, and many others are available, so I'm not here to sell Legal and General to you. You know, there are plenty of others with plenty of investment, tucked away as well. L&G alone stewards the savings and pensions of approximately 1.5 million people across London. So that, if you imagine the West Ham's London Stadium, that's 23 times the capacity of that stadium. You imagine 23 ones of those, everyone passing a bag around like in a church collection, all pensions, savings, all going into one place. And that's just our company. So there is huge amounts of capital, savings, pensions, that the likes of L&G or others are stewarding on behalf of the city. And the key trick is how we reinvest those pensions and savings back into tackling this issue: housing, infrastructure, education, community-led regeneration that benefits the city, that is the place where all these people live. So at the moment, and Waqar's alluded to this, I think it's absolutely critical issue. Their pensions and savings are unintentionally and occasionally tapped up for this kind of issue, but it's often packaged into debt that we loan to Waqar or we loan to Boris and Rishi by way of gilts. But we're not at the moment really coordinating on where is the need in London. I'm working with the GLA and boroughs and the housing associations to tackle this issue of where's the need and how do we take these huge amounts of capital the city has to meet what is a huge need for investment. You will see very soon, and we're about to announce this, we are doing exactly what Waqar has encouraged us to do, and investing equity in both the occupational side and taking development risk. But that is still baby steps, and it's with one housing association. We would love to do that more across the city and really work more collaboratively with the likes of the GLA. First one, investment. Second one, the big one, land with planning. The L&G alone owns land within the M25 that we would love to bring forward for affordable housing. We've even gone comfortable with the idea, this won't be some high best value. This will be existing use value. We'll take a hit on the land value. We just want to bring this land forward to create affordable housing. Can we get the planning to get cracking on it? No. If we do get planning, does it take ages where we get passed between the GLA and the boroughs for years and years? Increasingly and sadly, yes. Have to just be very frank and say this system needs some proper reform. And the planning system in London at the moment is just not working. We'd quite happily pay more for planning. We just need more resource. And the idea that some of these boroughs are producing 3 starts and 1 affordable home in a whole year is clearly unacceptable. And if we as L&G are willing to waive maximising our price for our land, I think hopefully that throws the gauntlet down to the public sector as well, to say, could we agree that maximising land value is not the most important issue here, but creating more supply is actually more important. We've got some very absolutely legal, very workable mechanisms to bring this forward. We've been doing it all up and down the country with various local authorities where we can work with this best value model to create the affordable housing that the city or the regeneration the city needs. We don't really do it in London yet. There's still this fascination with how much could we get for the land. And as I say, if we as L&G and in the private sector, financial sector can waive that, I'd like to think there's a challenge for others there as well. 2 quick ones more. Build costs, again, already been alluded to. I'm definitely not here to sell Legal and General's modular factory, but I'm not an estate agent on commission for that. But just to point out, this is a huge issue and it's not going away. In fact, it's getting bigger. It is why we've invested tens of millions of pounds in a housing factory to try to bring some consistency and moderate this build cost inflation. And I do just believe generally, whether it's our factory or anyone else's, it's a key part of the solution. You know, we can't create affordable homes if build costs swallow up all of the other issues I've mentioned already. So bringing modular in, looking at ways of addressing build costs is really important. And lastly, subsidy, because this one underpins it all. Everything else I mentioned, investment, land with planning, build costs, will be equally relevant if you're talking about build to rent, for example. Where the differentiation comes and what makes this housing affordable rather than market rent is this subsidy. So that's great. It's fine. We obviously typically use grant, or as I say, there are 2 key elements I don't think we explored. The first one is the one I mentioned earlier around land being injected at a lower price. The second one that we still don't do anything like enough of in London is using the public sector's covenant to bring down the cost of funding, because the likes of the Legal and General and others simply can take a lower return if someone is underwriting risk to us. It's just the way that we're regulated, to create more affordable homes. So this is using some of the longer lease models or other mechanisms available, but fundamentally it's bringing cheaper money out of the likes of an LNG to create more affordable homes. We've got now plenty of models of where this works really well and creates lots of revenue for boroughs. It's just a matter of some political boldness and leadership to drive this one and to take advantage of this form of subsidy alongside the other really important ones to do with both grant and, as I say, this challenge I'm throwing down about land values. So to summarize in 7 minutes and 47 seconds, I think where I'm at with this at the moment is the situation is untenable. We do need to collaborate. I'm so delighted Future of London and Montague Evans are supporting this, and others are really on the case with this, because we as a capital, at City, as a society, we really do have options to address this. We need to reform the structure, particularly around planning, and co-create solutions that unlock new sources of investment, new sources of subsidy, and new sources of land with quick and permissive planning, and tap into new sources of building these homes more cheaply and more sustainably.
Thanks, Pete. Really brilliant to hear you outline so clearly some really important strategies. So investment, land, build costs and subsidy, and building on Waqar and Joanne's point so brilliantly. So I'll invite the panelists all to pop back up on screen now. We're going to move on to a Q&A session with our panel, and as audience members, you're absolutely encouraged and invited to get involved, so please do pop questions if you haven't done already in the Q&A chat at the bottom. But I'm also going to ask our audience to join in on the debate based on, I suppose, your experience currently working in the sector, but also based on what you've heard today. So you should be able to see shortly some poll questions pop up on your screen. They will be reflecting the questions that I'm about to ask the panel. So the first question is, do you think collaboration is a useful tool for helping the sector overcome the affordable housing challenge? So that's a question that the audience should be able to answer in a poll. And I will also be asking our esteemed panel to respond to that one. Secondly, who do you think needs to be collaborating more? And finally, how good is your organisation at collaboration? So we've already heard elements of those answers from our panelists, but I'd just like to hear your initial or kind of summary responses to that, as well as getting a sense from the audience how their organisations are responding to the collaboration challenge too. So Joanne, let's jump to you first. Do you think collaboration is a useful tool? Who do you think needs to be collaborating more? And how good is your organisation?
Yeah, so I think absolutely collaboration is really key. It does take time and energy and a willingness to get into a collaborative space where it's going to work. You can't go into a collaborative space solely with your own organisation's agenda only at its heart. It needs to be kind of a shared, going into it with a shared endeavour to get a better outcome. I think the space perhaps where more collaborative work could be done, picking up on Waqar's point in particular, pre the planning system, I think I would, have to say local authorities, everyone knows this, over the last 10 years have had 40% of their funding cuts, and our funding methodology isn't keeping up with deprivation. And the new system of funding that will address that isn't yet going to come in for the next year, perhaps longer. So there's definitely a funding issue in local government that impedes the progress of the planning system. There's also a skills and capacity issue. So perhaps the issue is around a collaborative equity investment agenda with planning system across London to invest upfront in the skills and the capacity needed to dramatically scale up outputs from the planning system. And I think that may be a game changer, that sort of collaborative thinking, and then would go into paying dividends to development schemes coming forward more fastly. So that's where you could perhaps get the return. So definitely more space on that, perhaps private sector investment with public sector off balance sheet.
Thanks, Joanne. Let's jump to Waqar, since he was past the buck there in that response. So just to summarise the questions, do you think collaboration is a useful tool? Who needs to be collaborating more? And how good are you at collaborating?
Well, I think firstly, yes and no. I mean, it depends on what the definition of collaboration is. Is it an overextended term of partnership, which doesn't really mean anything? So I think it's important. No one can say collaboration is not a good thing, but I think the question is, what are the terms and conditions that underpin each organization's objectives to support collaboration? So in our, how good are we? Well, we currently, I mean, I think there's three things that we focused on in L&Q. Firstly, we set up a Build London Partnership Programme to help small housing associations get into development, unlocking sites. We're doing it at cost, so they don't have to take development risk. We will. They can acquire those assets at cost. That's a form of collaboration. We've done collaboration with the GLA, where it would have taken 25 years to complete Barking Riverside. That will be done in half that period through that strategic partnership. We've got a lot of assets that we own in local authorities. In fact, we operate in about 100 local authorities, where many of those local authorities, our involvement is absolutely minimal, and therefore it makes sense that we sell those assets to other housing associations. But we see all of those partnerships with either government agencies or local authorities or with the not-for-profit housing associations. When it comes to collaboration with for-profits, the focus is there on money, which is their primary motivator. And for that, we do see the only way we can collaborate is through sharing risk and reward. And we haven't had conversations or seen conversations that support sharing risk and reward. Everybody wants to acquire completed Section 106 assets at a discount so that they can get their returns. Nobody wants to have a conversation about unconsented land sites, which may get planning within a time frame or may not, and of course, construction. So going back to my point, we do see collaboration, but it has to be based on an understanding of where risk and reward sits. And then finally, with house builders, we started the very first sector joint venture with Taylor Wimpey going back 15, 16 years ago. And now it's become quite normal, and we've got 4 billion of a development program with 16 joint ventures with various house builders. So again, that's a tried and tested model, but we know works. So absolutely agree. It's great. It's got to be, there's got to be more collaboration, but it's got to be on terms and conditions and sharing of risk and reward.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder, if you've not already filled out the poll, giving your response to those three questions, then please do. I think we've got a few more moments and we'll be sharing back what the audience thinks as well as what the panel thinks of that. So just to round off the conversation again, Pete, is it useful? Who needs to be doing it? And how good are you?
I mean, I think I made clear, for me, this will only be solved by, do you mind if I'm just very frank about this? I mean, you look at where we are as a city in the kind of arc of history, and this isn't going to be a long ramble, I promise, but you look at places like Liverpool at the moment, and they have had a huge economic boom if you go back into their past, massively profitable city, and they've then significantly declined and are now looking to level up. And, in London, we're in danger of spending a huge amount of our time obsessing about levelling up funds and why is London not getting enough levelling up from central government, and bidding for levelling up grants. These pots of money are kind of 5 million here, 10 million here. We just need to recognise our city at the moment, in the arc of its history, is booming, it's prospering, it's doing incredibly well as a city as a whole. But a bit like Liverpool was built on the injustice of the slave trade, and there were lots of really abhorrent injustice that were going on underneath that economic growth. In London, there's a lot of injustice across the city that, despite us booming as a city, we're not really dealing with. But my point in all this is we have the resources in the city to tackle the injustices in the city. If one company alone, we don't even own this office building, we lease a building on one office building in one street in the City of London, and it's £1.4 trillion sat in this one company. And there's another few just down the road. So, there's significant amount of resources that we can bring together as a city to tackle this. But it's a deeper collaboration than we've seen so far. And, I will we will be announcing a partnership very shortly that addresses Waqar's point about taking risk in development. But this isn't just about one particular thing. It's also, being really frank, about us paying more. You know, if we want quicker planning permissions, we know we need to pay more to planning departments to enable them to resource up, and we're quite happy to do that. So there is a bit of a kind of focusing on where the need is, focusing on where the injustice is, and then coming together collaboratively rather than via ridiculous OG procurements, coming together collaboratively to try and really focus on who's best placed to address that need. That's what I'd love us to do more of.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, well, we're shortly going to jump into the questions that you, the audience, have posed for the panel. Before we do that, let's take a look at what you think in response to those questions around collaboration. So if we can take a look at those poll results, we should be able to see, well, everyone should be able to see here that, yep, 62% strongly agree that collaboration, better collaboration, is a key to unlocking the affordable housing crisis. And pretty good. Organisations are, on the whole, everyone's feeling relatively confident that they are doing quite well at collaboration. But the key sectors that need to be doing more collaboration, according to our audience, are better collaboration between public and private sector. And I think we've touched on that in the discussion already, so perhaps that's something we can pick up on further in our conversation. And it also looks like better collaboration between local authorities and better collaboration between local and central government come up second and third as important collaboration routes. So let's keep that context in mind as we jump into the audience question and answer session. We've got some brilliant questions coming through. Let me ask the first one. This is from Vasco Basil. Vasco asks, is there scope for innovations in building techniques and materials to make the decision on green energy easy? So we've already talked on MMCs, and I wonder if there's something we can pick up there. Who would like to jump in on that question, Vasco?
Oh,
go ahead.
Give a view on that. I mean, I think we have been investing in research and development in how we can build more efficiently, and also from looking at some of the mistakes that we've made in the past with CHP systems that are incredibly expensive to maintain, and of course where currently energy bills are. But I think this is something that there needs to be far more collaboration. The technology isn't really out there at an efficient sort of price to either install or to maintain over the long period. And hence, going back to my one of my early comments was that this is where we need to see government incentives moving away sometimes. You know, there's 28-30 billion allocated to this, to the housing sector, but that's not always targeting the right places. And can we get more of that government funding, whether it doesn't have to be subsidy into homes, it could be subsidy into universities, into colleges, into R&D, so that the implementation costs and the long-term maintenance cost of efficiency measures are going to be lower. And we recently launched a sustainability linked bond where one of our KPIs is to reduce our net carbon emissions through energy efficiency programs. And those kind of investment, those kind of bonds, those sustainability linked bonds do help drive organizations to start investing in things like that. So I think we're at the beginning of that journey, but this is something that we all need to see happen. Otherwise, we're not going to be providing affordable homes if the energy bills don't make them attractive or affordable.
Great, thank you. Joanne or Pete, do you want to jump in with a response to that?
I think I would go back to the idea around looking at how you can put the right infrastructure into places, because we address the fabric in properties, but the energy that's going into them often requires major infrastructure like district heating systems, like renewable power systems. So supporting the funding for that needs to be done at scale, needs to be cross tenure. So I think that we need to be thinking more along those lines rather than organisational responses to retrofit and individual property responses. So let's look at neighbourhoods and how we can bring the investment in to those together.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, Joanne, skills as an important part of that mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're thinking about is the concept of regeneration. We use regeneration to increase supply of homes. In a net zero world, we need to be broadening out our conceptual red line to embracing existing homes as part of that. And with that, we need partners that can work in the new build sector and work with the existing stock and address the issues that affect both of them together. So you're getting a join up. So that there is an issue about organisational skills and purpose, as well as individual skill levels for the green economy.
Pete.
Really briefly, I think there's two elements to this. The first one is new build housing. I mean, to be frank, we'll always obviously look for ways of doing that more efficiently, but we've committed all of our homes will be net zero in operation by 2030. So the commitment's there. Obviously, if we can do that more cheaply, so be it, but we're not going to wait for tech to arrive to make it cheap enough to do it. It's just a moral imperative to do that. So that's new builds. The big challenge I think we're all really aware of is retrofitting existing stock. And my honest personal view on that is you actually don't need huge amounts of technical innovation, because a lot of the tech is already there. We actually need financial innovation and collaboration between the sector and government to create the frameworks through which, you know, the huge amounts of pensions and savings money that we have in the UK can move in to address this need for financing for retrofitting homes. So it's less about kind of technical innovation and more about financial innovation to create fair and equitable models through which these kind of things can be financed. It worked with solar and wind in the past. That's how a lot of these now very thriving industries got started. It's got huge economic benefits and social benefits around skills, leveling up, you know, getting people back in employment. But at the moment, you've got huge amounts of capital tapped up, sat over here, huge need over here, and we're not joining the two up efficiently as a society very well yet. Okay,
so it sounds like an emphasis on collaborative investment in skills capacity and financial innovation and models might be a route to unlocking the affordable housing challenge. Okay, let's move on to another question. We've got so many brilliant ones coming in. We have a question here from Janet Sutherland. Janet asks, is there a risk that refinancing existing affordable housing with private equity may lead to a loss of homes at social rent? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in with a response on that one. Waqar, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I absolutely agree with that point. And for that reason, we are only looking to have conversations about existing affordable housing with other not-for-profit providers, so that those homes remain in social housing in perpetuity, and any benefit that is extracted from those homes is reinvested in communities or into more affordable housing. So we're quite clear about that. Where we do see the role of private equity, which is for profit, and we do see nothing wrong with for profit, is either in more risk or in commercial activities. So if you take shared ownership, for example, the asset will eventually leave the social housing space. Once the first tranche is sold, it's just a rental income stream until the individual staircases, and that property is left to the social housing sector. So it makes sense to have that conversation about whether housing associations want to enjoy that rental income stream over a long period, or can they realise that earlier as equity by selling to equity investors, so they can reinvest in more affordable housing. And then the other areas, you know, as already mentioned, if people want profit, then they've got to be prepared to do two things. One, take more risk and be prepared to take losses as well. And what we haven't seen is models where investors are prepared to put equity and accept that they might take a loss. This equity shouldn't come with any conditions attached to it. There should be no terms and conditions, no covenants. It's equity. You put your money in, you've got deep pockets like we know Peter has. He needs a sense of humour, long-term patient capital, and hope for a gain. But if you make a loss, get used to it. That's the role of equity. And if we can have those kind of conversations on the commercial and development space, but absolutely affordable housing, our view is it should stay in the not-for-profit affordable sector. Thank you. I know Pete will have a different view, but that's my view.
Go ahead, Pete.
I don't. It's a it's a point of principle. I don't. If there's enough equity to produce all the social and affordable housing that the UK needs, I'm certain my life does not exist to try and put LNG's money where it's not needed. The raison d'etre for us is finding areas in society that need investment and then channeling people's pensions and savings to meet that need, which helps make their lives better and create this virtuous circle where people's pensions and savings are improving their lives in the places that they live. That's what I'm living for. That's why I keep working here. If Waqar tells me he doesn't need the investment, that's not a bad thing at all. He's got some better money somewhere else. No problem with it.
I've got a follow-up question from Janet, specifically for you, Pete, but I think actually we could perhaps hear from other panelists on this one as well. Janet asks, why do you think we as a nation are so reluctant to adopt successful models of collaboration that we've seen in many instances in Europe between public, private, local and regional and national governments? So I'm not too sure which specific examples Janet's referencing there. Janet, if you've got some examples, do pop them in the chat and we can all benefit from hearing about those. But as a general question, is that something you can respond to there?
Maybe I could have a go at that one first, and then really welcome other panelists' views and other people on the call. For me, it's not even Europe. Genuinely, the amount of collaboration we see in other cities around the UK is a whole multiple levels higher than that we see in London. I think, if I'm really frank, there are two things I've noticed about London. The first one is higher land values make everyone a bit more precious and concerned that they might be giving away profits. So there's less focus on the need and the social need and the social injustice, and a bit more focus on, well, that's quite a lot of land I could be throwing into this, which can pollute the discussion and make everyone, it's a bit like if you're really rich, you love, what are those premarital agreements people sign? I don't even know the name of them, but you know what I mean. They tend to be signed by very rich people rather than very poor people, because they're worried they've got more to lose. And so again, as I say, we're very happy to challenge that as LNG by putting our own land in the M25 in a discount. If that's what we need to do to be the first mover in that, then so be it. But there's something about the land value. And then there is something as well around just we as a capital city can get a bit an inflated opinion of ourselves. And I think learning from other cities, even in the UK, and proper collaboration around where that need is, and then not being afraid to look at new models to try and address that need is, for me, a really exciting model to take on. So I don't even think we need to look that further afield. A prenup, that's the name of it. I got there in the end. Thank you.
So we need to get rid of prenups within the affordable housing sector. I think that's the message, right, Pete?
Just be a bit more focused on addressing the need and working collaboratively, and moving forward with a commitment to each other, and a bit less focused on running 2-year-long procurements and ending up in a Haringey type 3 situation.
Well, there's certainly a conversation that's happening in the side of the chat here, and coming through in the question and answers relating to land values, and a statement from one of our attendees rather than a question is perhaps the problem is treating housing as an asset to generate profit. And I wondered if anyone on the panel wants to respond to that as a proposition. Maybe Joanne.
I think as a borough, we would agree, but we recognise that assets are the means by which you can generate further investment, and we're a borough that borrows to invest in our borough and in the assets and value that those assets generate for our residents. So I understand the point that's being made, but it's one of the ways in which you generate the financial capacity to grow and develop and deliver. I think on the general point about why do we not collaborate as much and as effectively as other cities, I think there is a continuing need for all of the partners to get into the space of the other partner and to understand what drives them. And the public sector is a political sector, and it's driven by economic as well as political cycles and agendas. There's no way around that. It just has to be understood, and creative models of enduring long term through that cycle, so it's flexible, need to be kind of brought forward. I think if we're going to sort of step into that longer term multi sort of stakeholder partnerships are being talked about.
I think that point you make around understanding the needs of other partners is really critical. It's something that we in the development of this programme have come up against time and time again. How do we understand what other partners need? And I suppose that's what we're trying to do with this programme, is make transparent what the needs are of the public sector, of the private sector, and of organisations working in between. So fingers crossed, by the end of the programme we might be a little closer to an answer on some of that, Joanne. Waqar, you wanted to jump in there.
I mean, I think the point about housing being treated as assets for income, there is a point about certain industries, like the house building industry is exactly designed to treat it as an asset to make an income. But I think the wider point there is housing that often is used as for overseas sales, or just kept empty, and not utilised as most efficiently as possible. That's where I think we need to ensure that we're doing everything we can, not for just building homes which are not utilised in the way they should be, which is people living there or families living there. So I think you can still make a profit, and you can still provide a home to people to live there, but the profit has to be reasonable. And I think sometimes in our industry, the profit is too speculative as to how much people can make. Some people can make 50% returns on development, others make 0. And that all links back to some of the opening points around just the risks around planning, design, construction, the uncertainty. The less uncertainty we have, the more players that will come into this market, the more not-for-profit and good organisations like L&G with their mixed motive almost towards long-term patient capital will be interested in this sector. So I think there is something on that. And then but the other point I would say around collaboration is I think there's something around regeneration, and that is something where we don't do well often in London. It just takes too long to get a regeneration scheme off the ground, and that sometimes is down to the various partners that you have to engage with, and they have, and Joanna says they all have different needs, but those different priorities don't often help. So some of our development directors often say it's just hard talking to the NHS. We'd just rather buy land clean from a private landowner. And that's a great shame, because there should be far more better collaboration between the NHS and with housing associations and local authorities to regenerate areas. I know I go back, 20 years ago, we were trying to acquire a piece of land from the MOD, which was next to an estate that we wanted to demolish and provide better homes and a better community. And 10 years later, we were still having that conversation with the MOD. It shouldn't take that long to talk to other public agencies, but they have competing priorities. And then the final point is transport. You can't have a good quality regeneration scheme if you're not providing the appropriate transport infrastructure. And again, those conversations sometimes just take too long. So my view would be that for all parties involved in accepting that regeneration is the way forward, they've got to put housing somewhere on their priorities if they want to make London a more attractive and better city for all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we've got a few moments left of the Q&A. I know Joanne's got to run off very quickly, so I'm just going to pose this very final question that I think is a brilliant one for her. It's from Matthew Nimmo at ICC. He says, I think Joanne's concept of cross-tenure, place-based neighbourhood retrofit is spot on. Can collaboration between local authorities and the private sector and or registered providers make this a reality? So, Joanne, your response, then you can leave, and then we'll hand over to Waqar and Pete to finish off.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Matthew. So the work that we're doing with London councils on the climate changes is looking at how we can create investable propositions to deliver these net zero neighbourhoods. So we're working with the UK Investment Commission and Bankers Without Boundaries to look at if we can generate places with the infrastructure required at scale. How can we draw in all the relevant public sector funding pots? How can we use the investment that RPs would be otherwise bringing to those homes in those areas? How can we then capture the investment potential of homeowners and of the landlords, private rented landlords in particular? So how can we create the infrastructure, the plan, and the income that can be generated from all of those sources to then go to the private sector to say, this is what we can deliver, this is the investment we need for you, these are the returns that can be generated over the long term. And that's why kind of the regeneration agenda does need to move from focusing on supply, which is very important, to focusing as well as the neighbouring and existing stock. And so that is going to create the scale of proposition that we hope to be able to generate additional funding.
Brilliant, thank you. Really strong response. Pete agrees. Do you want to follow up? We'll say goodbye to you now, Joanne, because I don't want to.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you as part of the panel. Thank you so much
for
joining us today. Pete.
Oh, I just was saying it's a great project. I'm involved in it as well. It's bringing together a lot of the kind of largest cities, and for me that it's that kind of, you know, open book. We're happy to be entirely open about the kind of different pools of money in LNG and trying to work out which one, if any, are the right ones to meet that need. But it feels to me like things like the kind of climate emergency and affordable homes, where we could just see there's a real social need there, and then we can kind of come together and say, well, look, who's playing the right social role in this? Is it Waqar's billions? Is it ours? Is it government borrowing? It doesn't really matter. You know, it's about finding the right models and something that we can all be proud that leaves a legacy. So that's the exciting challenge. But in our generation, there's several of these at the moment, and that's why it's a good time to be in the industry and working collaboratively with each other to try and solve it.
Great. Well, that's a very positive note for us to bring the discussion to a close on. But I do want to ask one more question, since I have you both as a captive audience. This final question is from Paul Lewin at Brent. He asked, will the government's current thinking on Section 106 create a significant risk to affordable housing land supply? Who wants to take us a kind of round of discussion on that?
Oh, Waqar, you go for it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That's a really good question, and I think with, I mean, in our case, we, regardless of what the planning outcome is, we aim to build a minimum of 50% affordable housing outside London and 60% inside London. So planning or government, the government steer towards these intermediate products isn't going to change our objectives to provide more social rented homes in London, which is where we see the greatest need. The challenge, therefore, is to build social rented homes where you're charging 50–60% of the market rent. It requires a lot of subsidy, and that subsidy, if it's not coming from government, we've got to be more efficient in how we build so we can charge lower rents. We are not for profit, so every penny that we invest can go back into building more homes, so we can put our own subsidy into every home that we build, and we're putting 150,000 subsidy in every rented home that we build in London. And then finally, we've got to be making those surpluses from the various commercial activities that we do. You know, I would say this, but L&Q started off 60 years ago without any government grant, without any government support, and built its first home in number 2 Wrottesley Avenue in Greenwich with 1 unit. Today we've got over 110,000 units. We didn't start off with government. We can still continue to deliver our objectives without government. It just makes it harder. We've got to work more efficiently, but you know, but we can still continue to provide more affordable housing if we all collaborate more.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the interesting question is, what is the government's thinking on this? And there's so many different reports and different documents with different levels of confidentiality that I think anyone who claims to know, including some of the civil servants, are probably kidding themselves. So I do think there's a genuine risk here. I'm confident that the government have heard that, but I definitely think it's worth all of us who care about affordable housing engaging at the moment and making it clear where we see risks, because, you know, I hope I've made clear that for London and everywhere else in the country, but particularly for London, this is just a critical social issue.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, on that note, I will bring the Q&A session to a close. I want to say a huge thank you to all of the speakers, Joanne, Waqar and Pete, as well as the Future of London team behind the scenes, and of course to our brilliant sponsors who have been the people who have made this whole event and indeed the whole of the coming programme possible. So they are Countryside, Montague Evans and Polythomas Edward Architects and Potter Raper. So you'll be hearing more about the great work that they do in this year as the year progresses. And before before you go, I would like to give you a flavour of what's coming up in the Affordable Housing Overcoming Crisis Through Collaboration programme. So we have next week, in fact, we'll be launching a practitioner poll with our network. So that includes you guys who are here on the webinar today. We'd really value your contributions. So please look out for that link in your inbox. It should take about 20 minutes to complete. The data will be informing some of the recommendations that we make at the end of this programme. So it's really critical that we have a sector view on that. If you're super keen though, you can have a sneak peek of the poll and get cracking on filling out the survey. The link to that will be appearing in the chat shortly, so you can just click through and respond to that now if you're feeling inspired by what you've heard today. In terms of real life events that we have coming up, we have on the 19th of May a field trip to Waltham Forest. This will be a great opportunity to hear firsthand how project teams are navigating the complex challenges faced by the housing sector, some of which we've discussed today. We will be unpicking these challenges in two ways. We'll be visiting a retrofit property as part of London Borough of Waltham Forest's retrofit scheme, and we will be also hearing about the affordable housing challenge from a regen perspective, visiting the former Marlow Road estate, where the council's development partner and one of our sponsors, Countryside, will be sharing how they're collaborating to deliver affordable housing there. Places are limited, but do sign up if you're interested, and again that link will be in the chat. And then looking ahead to the rest of the year, you can anticipate being invited to a senior level roundtable and of course our annual Future of London conference, which will be happening at the end of September. So do keep an eye out for those details. The theme of that conference will be the Affordable Housing Challenge, and we'll be investigating and interrogating approaches to collaboration across the whole sector. So with that, it's time to bring the session to a close. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your brilliant contributions in the chat. It's been a really lively discussion, and do also keep an eye out for a very brief feedback survey that will be popping into your inbox so we can learn how we can do better. Thanks very much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Affordable Housing Overcoming Crisis Through Collaboration event. Bye.